We're going to look at what you do when you want to analyze the relationship between two quantitative variables. In this example here, we have a table of data and it has 4 different questions that people were asked. And every person who takes this survey gets their own row. So this is something that we're pretty used to. Whenever you have a row in a spreadsheet, it usually represents an individual. So each of these is an individual, a different person, and they answered these 4 questions here as part of taking this survey. And what we can do now is start to analyze relationships. First thing we're going to do is look at some quantitative variables. So I want to see if the number of siblings and the number of cars in a family are related, if they depend on each other. In other words, if I knew the number of siblings, let's say I know that your family, you have 2 siblings, so there's 3 kids in the family, I would be better able to predict the number of cars in the family than if I didn't know the number of siblings. So knowing that information helps me make a prediction. Now to do this, we're going to use our handy dandy stat key. And when we pull up stat key, on the left here we have descriptive, statistics, and graphs. And everything we're going to be looking for is in the 2 variable spots down here, these last 3 areas. And we said we have 2 quantitative variables. And we know that because both of these are numbers, number of sibling and number of cars in family. So we are going to choose 2 quantitative variables. And we'll see there's already some data preloaded and it makes a scatter plot. Whenever you have 2 quantitative variables, it's always going to create a scatter plot like this. So we edit our data, and one handy thing about stat key is it allows us to copy paste in some data. So if I go ahead and drag right over my labels over all of this and copy it, Control C to copy, I can actually delete everything in here and paste just like this. And all of my data gets pasted in. You'll notice that the format's a little bit different. Instead of having commas between like it did before, I have a tab when I pasted it out of Excel. Now that is something that's actually going to be okay. The only thing that's going to be trouble is having these spaces here in my title. Those aren't going to work necessarily the way I want it to. So if I just change this to siblings and cars and I get rid of all those extra words, this should work. And then it created a scatter plot here. And if I go back into edit data, you'll see that it reformatted it so that it does have commas in between the things, in between the different numbers. So I have this scatter plot, and I'm going to use this to see if there is a relationship. So if I click this button that says show regression line, it'll show the trend, the basic trend line going through my data. And looking at the data before that line was there, it was kind of hard to tell. I'm not going to lie, it was a little bit hard to tell what the pattern was. I don't really see a very convincing pattern in this set of data. And even when you draw that line in, I can't say that I'm particularly sold on the idea that there's a really good trend going on. We do have this one point up here that seems to be helping out the cause. And let's see what would happen if we were to move just that one data point. How would that change the results? So just by moving that one data point from where it was, we can see that this line actually turns almost completely over. And when moving one point is that influential, especially when that point is not really that far out there, it's not a major outlier, that to me is a good signal to say I'm not so sure that this trend line is as good as I think. I'm not so sure that there really is a relationship between these 2 variables. So as far as looking at quantitative things, plot your data, make a trend line, and take a point kind of near the outside and move it around. And if your graph is pretty robust, if it doesn't really change, there still seems to be a clear pattern, or if the dots even without the trend line form a very obvious pattern, then you know you have something going on. There's probably a dependent relationship. However, when they're kind of scattered all over, there's not a clear pattern, and moving one dot totally changes the pattern, then you know that they are probably independent. These 2 variables do not affect each other. Knowing the number of siblings does not necessarily help you predict the number of cars, at least from the data that we collected from these people. If the amount of fuzziness in making this judgment call is bothersome to you, the good news is that when we get into our module later on of dealing just with scatter plots and quantitative data, we will be able to get very specific, calculate p-values, do things that make it far more statistically solid instead of just kind of an arbitrary judgment call, which is what we're doing now. So for now, bear with the fuzziness and know that there will be more clarity and precision in our estimates in the future.